Our work sessions are intended to be informal. We used to have tables in the middle so we may use first names and so forth when we're talking to each other at these meetings. And but I'd come up here and take a look, and we're getting a list of future agenda items. I think some of us lined up enough future agenda items to last for a while.
No, I think so.
Any future agenda items people have at the moment?
Oh, I'll raise one. In our City Commission goals and objectives, we talked about doing a charter revision on a 2-year time frame, and we're now into September and almost into October, and to accomplish something like that on a 2-year time frame, given the outline that the city attorney had drafted. I think there was a memo that they wrote on how long it would take, and et cetera. If we're going to accomplish that on a 2-year time frame, I think we have to start taking action on it. So I would like that on a future agenda item.
Okay. Okay. Our next item is use of electronic devices at the dais. It's listed as I'm the person in question. Oftentimes I've noticed people using their computers when they're up here, looking at emails and so forth. And I think the major concern is the public not knowing necessarily what's going on at that particular point. I personally don't have that much of a problem of it, but we've got a kind of a policy that we don't receive electronic communications while we're here. And I think that's happened more than once, and more than one person has been involved. In terms of a mechanism, if people want from the outside to comment on something that's going on, if there's a mechanism that it either could come through the city recorder, we're trying to look at other mechanisms of actually doing that, of permitting communications online for people who aren't here, but we don't have anything in place at this point. And I think I was just going to perhaps ask Nancy if she has any comments at this point in the game, and if emails came forward while we're on a discussion item for something of that nature, whether you would be able to incorporate that.
That would be a policy decision that the commission would want to make, I believe. There are programs, electronic programs out there that can actually bring comments in from the public, not necessarily during meetings, but prior to meetings, to allow for additional public comment. Our Granicus system that we use here, it's just another module that they have that can be utilized that way. As far as the public emailing, just sending me a random email during a meeting, I think we'd have to talk about that with the city attorney to see how that could be incorporated. But we would want to have a policy set on that. But that's all I.
Yeah, I was hoping the emails wouldn't be random. They would be something to the point of something that's before.
Well, I mean, I don't mean random in that sense of the word, but just coming in at an unexpected time during a meeting, and then getting that email and getting it to you and copying it, and I mean, there's just a lot of logistics that would have to be dealt with during that. But this other Granicus program would kind of alleviate that. It would give more opportunity for the public to comment, that's for sure. But we can look into that further. But
Commissioner Nacita's on there before I am.
Okay, go ahead. James?
I reviewed this agenda item, and I reviewed the policy, and I think in light of what I've read, I'd like to propose an amendment to our City Commission rules. Namely, I don't think I see a lot of merit to a rule that precludes using computers during regular meetings and during executive sessions, for example. I don't think there's any purpose to prohibiting personal computers or communications devices during work sessions. As the mayor introduced when he opened the meetings, these are informal sessions. I don't see any purpose of becoming rigid as far as what a commissioner can and cannot do during a work session. A work session, for example, if there's something that's not on the Granicus monitor, if the commissioner wants to find a website that's got some information that might be pertinent to what's being discussed during the work session. If a commissioner knows some expert and wants to shoot an email saying, we're talking about this during our work session, what do you think? Do you have something you can shoot me in a PDF? We need an answer. I don't see anything wrong with that. We're not making any decisions during work sessions. I do think that as they are written, our rules do. I think the prohibition, as it's written now, does apply to work sessions. And I think as a policy matter, I don't agree with the policy.
Mayor, I believe what's dispositive about Commissioner Neceda's comment is that you're not making decisions in those meetings, and not formal decisions. You may reach consensus, but you're not making formal decisions. One thing that isn't addressed in the policy that I want to make sure I point out is that the policy applies to elected officials that are making these decisions. Frequently, you will see staff up here working on their computers, and I've mentioned how much work I know Dave Wimmer did on the budget while he was sitting in these meetings. And I want to try to encourage our staff to sit here for maybe several hours at times when they may not even need to be on the agenda.
Yeah.
I like the fact that they're doing that so that we get productivity out of them. Also, I, from time to time, get a buzz in from somebody saying, don't forget to mention in your reports about the antique fair or some other thing that is out there that I may have overlooked, and that's helpful to me to be able to share that with you. So just wanted to make sure that we understood that, because I know sometimes you might have had concerns about, well, our staff are emailing during meetings, and we text, email, do research, and sometimes even write memos and stuff while we're sitting here. So.
No, I personally, I don't have a problem with that either. Benny?
I pushed my little button thingy. So I think it's a perception thing, and I think it's good for us to be reminded that even though we are looking up research and it's a work session, the audience doesn't know what we're doing back here. So if you are looking up research, you should say something to that effect, because if somebody's up here testifying and you decide you want to go look up a code or you want to go look up something on the computer, they're telling you their story and you're on the computer not paying any attention at all. That's just, I don't know, it's a perception thing. It appears like you're being kind of rude and not listening to what people are telling you. That's just my thoughts.
I think both of your points are good. One is that if we in fact are requesting some information from somebody on the web or something of that nature, we probably ought to announce what we're doing.
Yeah, because
while we're in study session, just to let people know,
especially
and that it's relevant.
Like have to get your computer and get it on and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, other than that, would you have issues?
Mm-mm.
I mean, I think we're all probably sensitive to not appear to be doing something else. As I say, now we got the timer available. The timer's working down here, but the person that's speaking is right there. I want to look at the person that's speaking. I don't want to look at the timer.
Yeah.
So we got a setup that we used to have before up here. So I don't, the person knows when their time's running out, and I think we're all sensitive to that. We'll be paying attention when somebody's speaking, I hope. Tom.
Suggestion regarding the timer.
Excuse me, Tom, could you?
Tom O'Brien, Oregon City. Just a suggestion regarding the timer. Frequently we have people who are not familiar with the procedures here who come to testify, and kind of a universal thing with Toastmasters and other groups are a light system that lets them know when they are running out of time. They're not really focused on that little clock there. They don't know what the purpose of that little clock there is.
She's getting that out during our regular commission meetings.
We started that last
There's,
week.
I think, one located up there and one located right there. I think maybe the last meeting was the first meeting we did it at
Yeah.
for some time. Yeah.
So
No,
it works
that's
out.
okay.
Nope, it's
That's
great.
okay.
Good comments, Tom.
Great minds think
Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, just a couple comments. I think that personally, I agree with Commissioner Nacita. I don't think that there's as much of an issue during work sessions. I think that any and all information that you need to come to consensus or make decisions should be available to you. My only suggestion would be that if you do find something online or at the last moment, that it be disclosed and that it be shared with everyone rather than kept to yourself and just used
Right.
for your own frame of reference, but that you just disclose it
I
during
think
the
that's
during
perhaps
the meeting.
partially what Betty was getting to, too.
The other concern that I would have, though, is you would need to identify the devices that you want. For instance, do you want to use it on a phone? Do you want to use it on your laptop? Because when you have phones available at the dais, then the perception issue is a problem again. You've got people thinking, oh, well, they are our governing body and they are our elected officials and they're texting their mother or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Yeah, and so, I mean, like Commissioner, City Manager said, that it's different for staff because we're not the governing body.
Right.
It's just a different frame of reference, but those are my comments.
Those are good comments. I would say we're all issued laptops. That ought to be the communication device.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I said we're all issued
Right, okay.
laptops. That probably ought to be the communication
Okay.
device. Do we at this time have to set out a formal policy, or can we give us some running time on it and see how it works?
Well, as I mentioned, the current policy that's under,
That change I understand.
I think that would be the first order of business would be to maybe give some direction to formulate a change that's like specific to work session.
You had another comment, Nancy?
Yeah, I do. If you go to, what page is that? Page 8 of the document, the resolution there, it talks about the use of electronic devices. And Section A, when you read it, it actually says any electronic communication, commissioners shall not send or receive electronic communications concerning any matter pending on the agenda before the commission during any commission meeting, and shall not use electronic communication devices or access information regarding matters not in consideration before the commission. So anything that is in consideration before the commission, if you're looking up something related to an agenda item,
Then it's already
then it's
handled.
already acceptable.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know that any changes would need to be made as long as there's this conversation's in the minutes and you have an understanding.
Yeah.
And I would, just to get it on the record that's being referenced, and you've indicated and Betty's indicated to it, we should announce what we're looking at, so it's, even we may not have anything printed, but we've got a reference point for the record purpose.
I just like to mention the way I'm reading that sentence, it would prohibit sending or receiving emails during a shall not send or receive electronic communications concerning any matter pending on the agenda before the commission during any commission meeting. So I raised the point earlier that if during a work session a commissioner knew someone who was an expert and asked that person a quick question and asked for some information on an agenda that the commission was discussing, I think this would prohibit that. Because it says any meeting, and earlier, what constitutes a meeting, there's a description of meetings, and a work session is a meeting. So I think that paragraph would prohibit that kind of informal communication during a work session.
Mr. Frazier, you're a former attorney. What are your thoughts?
I think he's still an attorney.
Oh, are you still an
Still
attorney?
paying those dues.
You were disbarred.
Sorry, I didn't mean to disbar you.
Not yet.
Within 2 minutes.
It'd be cheaper. Well, I was just jotting down some thoughts here about this because trying to summarize what you folks have been saying, which I believe is use of such devices is generally permitted at work sessions so long as it is disclosed to the public and does not present any, I guess, pose any, I don't know, I haven't got to that part yet about how to word the crafted language about perceptions, because I know there's been times when we've had trainers here making presentations, and some of you have been on your laptops, and
Yeah.
it didn't appear, at least, that the trainer had all of your attention at the same time. So that could somehow, when there's an engagement with a speaker, whether it's a staff or a citizen or somebody else, I think that's the rub.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so let's take a look at it, and maybe our meetings have to be changed to regular city commission meetings or some way that permits us to
Be more flexible during
be more
work.
flexible in our study sessions. I mean, his point is, it says meetings, and it isn't specific to the nature of the meeting.
Okay.
So
One
we're-
other comment on that might be, if there is an email communication that you'd like to make during a work session, that if you just jotted down the email address, I mean, bring it over to me and I can send that out myself.
Yeah, I
Then you
think
don't
that's-
have that conflict there, too.
I think that's a bit restrictive.
I would like to
Well,
also
how
refer you
often-
to the...
It almost puts you in the position of looking like a bird dog,
Well,
and you don't want to do that.
I'm trying to keep you out of trouble. I know the city of Gresham went through this big time in this last year because they had, I don't remember the whole case, but they had complaints from the audience, the citizens, because of what was going on at the dais, and they had quite the interchange over there.
Let's make
so-
the distinction between a study session at this time and a commission meeting.
Okay.
I think her point is, if we are in fact in deliberations about an item, we want to make clear what's going on. What we don't want to appear to do is, I'm going to look up something, and I look up something, and, well, that's not the way, that's not supporting my case, and so I don't bother to announce it. And we don't want that. I mean, if we're going to have the communication, then it should be available, whether it supports our case or not. And that's I think that would be one of the concerns.
So
That's
could
a
we do?
big temptation.
That is a big temptation, and in deliberations, we need to avoid it. If you're looking for some professional comment somewhere that doesn't happen to agree with you, I think you still have to get it out there in one form or another.
Well, I think you're right. You have to disclose what you're doing. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and of course, there's always the other observation, which is, and being respectful of your volunteer status, of course. But meeting preparation is supposed to include that kind of
Yes.
thing, where you can decipher whether you
Right.
want to bring that piece or not bring that piece, and whether you want to bring copies to share, whether you want to send them in advance so we can share them with everyone. So you probably want to encourage meeting preparation and have people come prepared so that they're not as tempted to use that
That's right.
tool
Well,
until
I think maybe our focus ought to be on what we can do at the work sessions at this point.
And the other thing too,
Limited,
remember
but-
when we talked about blindsiding? And I know that we don't seem to have much of that here anymore. We had a little bit of it, I think, my first few months here. We don't seem to have much of that now, and to
We were
some
just
extent,
trying to figure out how much we could get away with it. That's
well, it just seems like
Pushing the limits.
You know, we had a good retreat.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got it. Our team's working pretty well. It's, but to some extent, if you think about incoming commissioners that are brand new to the process, down the road, you want to write policy today that's going to work for them too. And when you think about that, I'm wondering how much of that might say to them, "Hey, you really don't have to be prepared. Just bring your laptop and you can surprise everyone, including yourself." That's probably not where you want to go.
Right.
So it's
Right.
a tough call.
I think we're focusing on the work session at this point.
Okay, so the language I wrote to summarize what you've said tonight is, use of such devices is generally permitted at, quote, work sessions, so long as it is disclosed to the public and remains courteous to guests and meeting attendees.
Should it be work sessions only? Or is it the...
At this time, I think is what we're talking about.
Okay.
I can say that.
You know, I think
in his statement?
you'll be exploring other things as we proceed and what's available in terms of people from that are following what's going on and want to make comments and aren't here in the audience, and mechanisms to get that onto the record.
That was going to be my point, that if something is brought up at the meeting via email or from the web, that the public hasn't had a chance to review that, even though it may be verbally announced. So it's just a logistical concern that you may have the freedom to do it, but then what is the right and the best way to go about
it.
keeping it a part of the record and making it work?
For the moment, is that enough deliberations on this item? And then was there anybody
do you
else?
want to, just so I'm clear on what the direction is, do you want us to fashion that as a potential amendment and put it on your consent calendar?
Yeah.
For work session only.
Yeah, I've got the operative language. Does anybody want to hear that language again?
Yeah.
Okay. Use of such devices is generally permitted only at work sessions, so long as it is disclosed to the public and remains courteous to guests and meeting attendees. Okay.
Anybody in the audience have any comments? Are you here for a specific reason? Just curious. Or are you just watching what we
End of
do?
Oregon Trail.
Oh, okay, yes. Okay. The electronic messaging policy for the City Commission.
Okay. This is a draft policy that you have in front of you. Back in April, the commission asked that we work on this, and it's just been a busy summer, and so we're finally getting to this. The policy was put together partly by using the city employees policy, and then we gave it over to our city attorney's office, and they added some things and just revised it. So it came as a joint effort there. I don't know the best way to actually go about doing this. If you wanted to just take it, you just read through it together, and then make your comments as we go along. I can read it if you'd like. It's just a couple of pages. Unless you've previously read it before arriving this evening and want to just bring out some
Why don't you go ahead and read it out, and we'll just follow it as you're reading it.
Okay. All right. The first half of the first page, the purpose, applicability, and in general, it's pretty general and standard there. I can skip that if you like.
Go ahead.
And I'll start there under message ownership. First bullet, all electronic messages to or from city elected officials where city business is discussed, whether on city-provided electronic messaging systems or on personal systems or web server pages, are subject to disclosure through valid public records or litigation discovery requests. Messages sent electronically can be intercepted inside or outside the agency, and as such, any expectation of confidentiality is limited. Accordingly, proprietary or confidential information should not be sent through email, instant messages, or other social media sites. All electronic messages stored in city-provided electronic messaging systems or composed, sent, or received by city elected officials, regardless of their content, are, by law, public records of the city. This includes email that is accessed through city-provided electronic messaging resources via external email systems such as Yahoo, Gmail, Hotmail, MSN, AOL, Comcast, and other email services offered by Internet service providers. In order to aid in record retention and organization, the city-provided electronic messaging system will be programmed to provide an automatic copy of all electronic messages sent to and from city elected officials, regardless of whether those messages are ultimately determined to be exempt from disclosure. And I wanted to stop there for just a moment and point out that that's something that staff is initiating at this point. It's not something new in the city management world because it's done in many cities, but it's a suggestion that we're making that all, and it's so that you don't have to understand all the retention laws, because, I mean, I have the book here. This is the law on retention schedules. If you want to read this and learn it and apply it to all of your email, you're certainly welcome to do that, but that's our job to do. And since all your email is public record anyway, then anything sent or received to your email inbox would come automatically to us, and then we would just maintain it. So when there's records
Good.
requests or whatever, you don't even have to mess with it. We'll just take care of it. That's what we're recommending. Any comments on that, or
No, I think it's a
should I just
great
go
idea.
on?
I think it's great.
I think it makes it easier on us to make a decision whether we delete something or not, where, in fact,
That's our concern,
Yeah,
that things
and-
just,
and I think
without
it's-
even
I
thinking,
think
they
it's
just get
an excellent
deleted.
idea.
you
Yeah.
know, and then we lose that.
While you're talking about that, may I ask a question? Because I understood when we had the first instruction on how to do all of this stuff, that we were to put things in transitory rather than delete.
Right, I was trying to teach you about retention, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that, but nothing ever goes away.
No, it won't,
I mean, it's huge now.
yeah.
Yeah.
you're making
It never goes away, no.
But see,
Nancy,
I've only deleted one email.
wouldn't it be,
do
though,
it,
that
it's
if
really
they
good.
adopted
Email
this and the
space.
city's backup files are in place, then could they delete? Because we
there-
back it up automatically, right?
It's known in the IT world, never rely on your IT's backup systems
Yes.
as a retention service for the city. That we need to be doing it appropriately up front.
So I should stop worrying
And
about
the
that
cost,
folder?
right, the cost involved in accessing it from the system is just outrageous, but
Thanks.
anyway.
I
So that's
worry
why
about
we're
folders.
offering to do it for you. We don't want more work, but, it's just the best thing to do. Okay, next bullet. If the information transmitted by electronic messages relates to the transaction of public business, that information shall not be deleted or otherwise disposed of unless done in accordance with a records retention schedule set forth in Oregon City Resolution 0931. Each email message or posting, such as a posting to a Facebook site, must be evaluated for content to determine which retention procedure to apply. The city recorder shall assist city officials as requested in making such determination. And by the way, one thing we didn't read at the beginning of this is this applies not just to email, but to any of the social media accounts, your Facebook or Twitter or whatever. The legal custodian responsible for retaining electronic messages on privately maintained electronic messaging systems will normally be either the originator of the message for outgoing messages or the receiver of the message for incoming messages. And when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, that's an important factor to note. The city shall not be deemed the legal custodian of messages that are not included in city-maintained backup files, such as your personal Hotmail account or whatever. We're just not the legal custodian of that, even though if it's a city business you're doing on a private email account, it's still a public record. When a public records request is made to the city that includes records retained by an elected official of the city recorder shall notify the affected official. Under the city's public records policy, the elected official has 5 days from the date of receipt of a request for public records, including for electronic messages, to deny in part, or grant in part the request. Alternatively, the elected official shall have 5 business days to explain why more time is needed for a full response. Failure to respond within the 7-day deadline, and that's an ORS guideline there that jumped in, shall be deemed as a denial. Expiration of this 7-day period triggers the right to initiate proceedings in circuit court to challenge the denial. The elected official may consult the city attorney for advice in dealing with a request for public records. Further representation of an elected official shall be a determination of the city manager or the city commission. It is the responsibility of each city commissioner to acquire appropriate training in retention of electronic messages. The city recorder's office is available to assist the commission with regard to standard retention practices. Training may not be necessary if you decided to go with, copying your emails to the city's box. Electronic messages are frequently inadequate in conveying mood or context. Elected officials should carefully consider how the recipient might interpret a message before composing or sending it.
It's a true statement.
Yeah. Use of electronic messages in public meetings. Use of email by a quorum of a body may, in some circumstances, constitute a meeting under Oregon's public meeting laws, even when discussions take place through one-on-one email discussions that then can be passed on to others. As such, the City Commission is encouraged to refrain from discussing city business via electronic messages in those cases in which members are deliberating toward a decision. And the Attorney General, or I don't remember. They're called serial meetings, and there's been some case law that's been gone through the courts on this very subject. That's why we put that in there, because it's come to our attention. Do you have any comments, or should we just keep on going and then make them all at the end? Or okay. The city provides electronic messaging resources to assist in conducting city business, including issuance of an email address that is to be used while conducting city business via email and not for personal use. These limitations include, but are not limited to, personal soliciting, lobbying, soliciting, recruiting, selling, or persuading for or against commercial ventures, products, religious or political causes unrelated to city business, outside organizations, or similar activities. Electioneering with regard to candidacy for public office, the operation of a business or for any undertaking for personal gain, use by or on behalf of any outside organization or third party. Next bullet. As records created by elected officials on city messaging systems are public records, the city may intercept, monitor, review, and/or disclose any and all messages composed, sent, or received on city-issued electronic resources. The interception, monitoring, and reviewing of messages may be performed with the assistance of content filtering software or by designated agency employees and/or designated external entities. City employees designated to review messages may include, but are not limited to, the city manager, recorder, or representatives from human resources, legal, or IT departments. The city may alter, modify, reroute, or block the delivery of messages as appropriate. This includes, but is not limited to, rejecting, quarantining, or removing the attachments or malicious code from messages that may pose a threat to city resources, discarding attachments such as music considered to be little business value and of significant resource cost, rejecting or quarantining messages with suspicious content, rerouting messages with suspicious content to designated city employees for manual review, rejecting or quarantining messages determined to be unsolicited commercial email or spam, and appending legal disclaimers to messages.
I think we need maybe a little discussion exactly what this means. We're talking about communications that the city commissioners are receiving or sending out, and the city may alter and do this. I think there should be some indication that we're going to be communicating as to when this is going to happen. And I mean, if you're going to delete something that's come into me and I don't know about it, I think I would have a problem with it. And so somehow, I mean, you may have we may establish the right to do it, but I think there should be some indication there would be communication with us ahead of time.
Okay, I don't know the answer to your question. I'll have to ask our IT to see how they do that. You know, I don't think it happens very often, but I've never received a message other than this is spam and it goes to my spam box.
Yeah.
We get notification of those at work when they catch something. Once a day, we get a box that shows what's been caught.
Well, that's true. We do too. We get there is a. I don't know a lot about it, so we can look into that. But I'll find out about that. Okay. And the last section, the system administrator shall keep a record of those messages altered, oh, there we go, modified, rerouted, or blocked. Okay, so that's taken care of. Even though the city employs antivirus software, virus-affected messages can enter the city's messaging systems. Viruses, worms, and other malicious code can spread quickly if appropriate precautions are not taken. Elected officials should be suspicious of messages sent by people not known to you, not open attachments. How are we going to do that? It's called using your best judgment. Using your best judgment.
That includes Hosni Mubarak,
All
who's sent me an email
32,000
recently.
people in the city that we don't.
Yeah.
I think the important word here is suspicious. Not open attachments unless they are anticipated by you. Disable features in electronic messaging programs that automatically preview messages before opening them. The city considers unsolicited commercial email, or spam, a nuisance and potential security threat. Elected officials are encouraged not to attempt to remove themselves from future delivery of a message that they determine is spam. These remove me links often are used by unscrupulous mass junk emailers as a means to verify that you exist. Attempted removal will only ensure that the member will receive ever-increasing amounts of spam. So that's just another little, warning from our IT. Upon expiration of term of office, the city will deny all access to electronic messaging resources, including the ability to download, forward, print, or retrieve any message stored in the system, regardless of sender or recipient, unless requested through the public records request policy of the city. And lastly, internet message boards are a fertile source from which mass junk emailers harvest email addresses and email domains. Elected officials are encouraged not to use city-provided email addresses when posting to message boards. Okay.
I have a question. The one about upon expiration of term of office. So that means that if we're no longer in office, we don't have access to any of our email anymore.
No, no. You don't have access to it in the same way that you did before, by just accessing your email account and getting it. But you can access it through public records
But
requests.
that's going to cost us.
Right, because you're no longer elected official. I mean, it would be
And it can be-
like any other citizen would want to request the email.
But even though they were ours.
Well, you have to remember that our policy is that if it's electronic, there isn't a cost. We can forward. If I fulfill a request with no paper copies, I just forward to you. It doesn't cost.
I received a substantial cost when I did that as a public record before. It was around $70.
Yeah, it could be the research time that was involved in it. I'd have to look at the request.
Right, and so you're telling me that research time wouldn't be charged at this
As
point?
a former elected official, former elected officials certainly have a respect. That's not entering the picture here, but they're viewed as citizens who make requests just as any other citizen.
Right,
Yeah.
but my problem is those emails were mine. They were directed to me that I handled.
Well, they were the city's property.
City.
They're city property. They came to you, but they're a public record.
Yeah. I'm having a problem with this. You can tell. I don't know. What does anybody else? Does it bother anybody else?
Doesn't bother me because I know work is work, and anything at work belongs to work, and anything with the
Well,
city
yeah, that's
belongs
true.
to the
But
city.
you may be going on to something later on in your life that you want to go back and look at an email that had to do, 10 years
Writing
ago.
your memoir.
Right, exactly. Or when I have to do that television documentary.
Well, if
You have to
we've
request
been
public
maintaining
records.
them all along, there's a simple way that we can just transfer them all onto a CD.
Okay.
And,
That
I mean,
actually happened when Daphne West left
Right.
office. I think she asked for that, and we accommodated it.
Okay. That.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, we will, if you want them there, we can get them for you. That's not the issue
Very
at all.
protective.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me when I left the police department years ago, and the chief said on my last day, he said, "Are you glad to have your civil rights back?" I didn't have them for very long until I got out of law school, but that it's, you give up a lot to be in the public service, and it's just sort of a reminder when we read all this, we're like, wow, there really isn't much privacy.
So, are we ready to go on to the next item? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, on the bulleted item that goes from the bottom of page 2 to the top of page 3, I need to think about this one, and I actually have some issues with it. The first sentence reads, as records created by elected officials on city messaging systems are public records, the city may intercept, monitor, review, and/or disclose, and I think my issue in particular is disclose. Well, actually, it's a bigger question. Any and all messages composed, sent, or received on city-issued electronic resources. I think that actually conflicts with the statutory provision in the Public Records Act, as interpreted by our city attorney, Mr. Sullivan, that a commissioner is responsible for his or her own responses to Public Records Act's requests. This paragraph, I think, is way too broad in general, and I think it does not protect a commissioner from kind of be the master of her or his own house, and I want to reflect on this and also maybe get background on the origins of this paragraph. I'd actually like to bring this draft with me down to Bend at the end of the month too, and see how other cities helped out with similar issues, because it just, I mean, a couple of paragraphs prior, and this second bulleted item at the top of page 2 directing the city recorder to notify an elected official of a Public Records Act request is my recollection of what got this whole discussion of this policy started. And Mr. Sullivan had written a memorandum regarding a commissioner's right as well as responsibility to make the determination on how to respond to Public Records Act requests. So this bulleted, the second bulleted item goes, I can see an origin in statute as to what statute this paragraph is responding to. I don't see what the last bulleted item on page 2 is responding to, and I think it's overbroad, and even potentially susceptible to abuse. So I have an issue with that paragraph, and want to think about it over the next couple of weeks before we.
Did you have the
decide
city
on it.
attorney look at those?
Yes, the city attorney's office, including Ed, who I know what you're talking about there, that particular ORS section that he mentioned. Ed reviewed this as well, so what you're referring to is incorporated in this. And as far as taking it to LOC, you certainly can do that. But I did some research on that, and I sent a message out to my recorders listserv, and I didn't get any response that there are other cities that even have a specific email policy for their commission. It's just not out there. I couldn't find. So if you can find somebody who has an opinion about it or how they're handling that, I'd be very interested to know that. But
I'm sure there's lots of opinions, but
yeah,
probably nobody.
I think that
nobody's incorporated it into the.
Unless I'm misunderstanding you, I think that even though the elected official has the right to determine if they want to fulfill the request, the statute does say that the records are public records, and what is your end result going to be in the long run? It's a public record, and it is not under the exempt category, generally. unless it's an attorney opinion or something like that. So it's going to be disclosable information, most likely, anyway.
Let me just, if I might, I was trying to see Commissioner Neceda's point. In one sense, I do. If the city manager has a problem with one of us, does he have the ability to intercept, monitor, review, or disclose any and all messages composed and so forth and sent? Who has that control? I mean, it could be used as a device against a given commissioner by staff. I mean, if you read it that way.
I understand what you're saying. If you look at it from a different perspective, even from the employee perspective, I mean, this type of language is in personnel manuals as well in the city's email policy, because the city needs to protect itself. That if there's misuse taking place on an employee's part, the city has to have the right, per policy, to go in and check those things out.
I understand that. It's just, it doesn't, since no limits are imposed in this statement, I would, I mean, he could take it to LLC, but I would like our attorneys to take a closer look at that particular paragraph.
Yeah.
Because I see Commissioner Neceda's point.
Could be abused.
Righty.
Are there any other issues? Okay, let's go ahead and continue on to the update.
So excuse me, as far as direction then, we will have the city attorney look at that section and make some revisions, and then we can bring the policy back under the consent agenda, see
Sure.
if we want to do that.
I would flag it in some way when it comes before us, so particularly James brought it up. But,
Want to have discussion on it?
Yeah, just,
Okay.
just to be...
Not on the consent.
So, for one thing, it's not on the... Yeah, I would suggest
Yeah.
not on the consent agenda.
Okay.
Okay, with that, we're going to talk about update on street tree and sidewalk repair, public outreach. Tony Conkle, this has been a hot issue in some neighborhoods.
It has. Pete's prepared a presentation tonight that we'll walk through, and then we can try and answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks. I'll just get this booted up. Nancy, I was going to use it off the internet. Is that okay? And it'll show up there? Okay. So, Public Works and Planning staff has just begun going to the neighborhood association meetings to talk about street tree and sidewalk repair policies that the city has in place. Our first one was with the Caulfield Neighborhood Association, and I'm just going to bring this up right now. So this PowerPoint presentation that we gave was a fairly short overview of the first part of the presentation is an overview of the benefits of street trees, because there's significant benefits to street trees, as we know. That includes stormwater management benefits, shading the street, aesthetic benefits, safety benefits from separation of vehicles from pedestrians and bicycles, and things of that nature. We also provided an estimate of what our canopy cover was citywide compared to other cities. And Oregon City falls somewhere in the middle as far as canopy cover compared to Lake Oswego, which has about 47%, and then Portland about 30%. These numbers probably change a lot, but depending on whether you include things like Forest Park and Tran Creek, and that sort of thing. But I think one of the most important opportunities for preserving urban forestry canopy is in our rights of way. As we go to more neighborhood associations and present this, I think we'll get different questions from different people and be able to change or alter some of our presentations. So, benefits of street trees, as we said, water quality, wildlife habitat, proven enhancements to real estate values based on various studies that have been done in Portland and elsewhere, and not the least of which is carbon storage and uptake and energy conservation. We gave some more detailed statistics on what property values were shown to, how those were shown to be impacted by in a Portland study, which showed that there was, based on a canopy size of about 300 square feet and within 100 feet of a house that was sold in a period that they studied, added about an average of $7,000 to the price of a house in Southeast Portland study. The estimates of what that was community-wide were about $1.1 billion, translating to about $45 million annually, and the maintenance cost of that, as borne by mostly by abutting landowners, was $3.3 million. And so there are what some people call ecosystem service benefits, which haven't necessarily been calculated yet, but the stormwater benefits and these things which were measurable based on home sale prices were proven. Also, there was a study in Lake Oswego and in Northwest Building magazine showing how this property resale value is shown. So we went over the city's street tree policy briefly with the Neighborhood Association and explained how prior to 1998 we didn't have adopted street tree standards, and we didn't have a street tree list until 2001. So we weren't able to say this is an appropriate species of tree to plant in a certain width of planter strip. And subsequently, we have subdivisions throughout the city where street tree roots are cracking sidewalks and lifting panels and that sort of thing, which is oftentimes the primary concerns of property owners because they bear that cost of replacement. When the roots lift the sidewalks, we get tripping hazards. We also get potential damage to when the tree is compromised to the point where it is a hazard due to falling potentially. That can be an issue too. But the biggest complaint we see by far is lifting panels. And here's a slide that explains basically what the city maintains and what property owners are responsible for maintaining. So everything between the curb is maintained by the City Public Works Department, and that includes trimming of street trees and so that sort of thing. We ask the property owners to trim their trees to a certain height before we do pavement repairs and that sort of thing. So everything behind the curb, and the curb itself, sidewalk, planter strip, and the trees are maintained by the property owner. So we talked about what is a hazard. Hazard would be, our policy is that a hazard can be a tripping hazard, which is when you have a lifted sidewalk with a lip of greater than a half an inch. That standard is actually getting enhanced through the American Disability Act to be a quarter inch. So it's becoming even more stringent. The threshold for what is a tripping hazard is becoming pretty slim. So
interrupt you just a moment?
Yeah.
The failure to take care of this, of course, that's the property owner that fails to take care of it, but the city hasn't really given any notification to the property owners, the city also liable.
The liability in our code is the property owners.
Yeah, no, that I understand.
Yeah, but if we have not notified the owner of a hazard, then there may be some question there. The Code Enforcement Department will measure this tripping hazard, and the city did a sidewalk study, which I'll briefly go into, to see how compliant we are with these ADA standards.
Pete, if I might.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mayor, generally it's you're talking about something that would then be a negligence claim. And negligence means whatever the ordinary standard of care is. And for cities, that's as long as our sidewalks and the street trees are on some sort of a rotational schedule and we're honoring that schedule, and it's fairly consistent with industry practice in other cities in Oregon, a negligence claim would be very unlikely to succeed. So that's how our insurance carrier would analyze that. So I think most of these things are probably on a rotation where we inspect them from time to time. And so that would be the limit. There wouldn't be any strict liability for us.
So currently, the process for sidewalk repair is a joint process. Owner would apply to the Public Works Department for a right-of-way permit at a reduced fee to repair the sidewalk. They will apply for a street tree permit, no fee, to the Planning Department, and we will evaluate whether there is truly a hazard or not. And if there is no hazard, then the number of replacement trees that is required is higher. If there is a hazard, the ratio of replacement is 1-for-1. And that's been the policy we've operated under for the last few years. And that's what's codified in our code. This is a brief summary of the sidewalk analysis for Caulfield neighborhood. So they estimated that they have approximately 18 miles of sidewalks and linear miles, and then they have what they estimate to be the minimum width of the sidewalks are about 3 feet. 27% of their sidewalks are excellent, and I think the most important statistic was the number of raised panels, which is where was 165. And this is a graphic illustration of the Caulfield neighborhood boundaries with those various sidewalks in there. The study looked only at the sidewalk condition. It didn't determine whether or not the sidewalk cracking or lifting panels was due to the presence of a tree root, but I talked to Jason Fraser in Public Works, and he said that in probably about 95% of those cases were due to tree roots. So then they ranked the number of raised panels in this graphic, and for each of the neighborhoods we're producing the same graphic so that we can provide that information to the neighborhoods.
That's good.
Now, there are alternatives to tree removal, but they may involve changes to the sidewalk situation that may not always meet Public Works standards or even Americans with Disabilities Act standards. So we want to advise people about that. City engineer may approve use of pervious pavers, rubber sidewalks, narrower sidewalks, meandering sidewalks, as you've seen in certain places around town, and shaving down the roots and replacing the panel. But in those cases, the tree might not survive. And those repairs all need to meet a minimum public safety standard. So the last slide that we've provided people is what does proper tree care consist of, and in all cases we recommend that if you need a professional, use a certified arborist, but these are some tips that people have, because if you're overwatering and fertilizing in your new trees, you don't necessarily need to do that once they're established. And probably the most important thing is that we currently have a standard of 4.5-foot planter strip for a detached sidewalk in a residential subdivision, and larger than that for some of our street sections. So we're hopeful that as we move forward, we'll be able to have fewer and fewer problems with trees creating problems and having room to grow. In addition to choosing the right tree for the right planter strip, we are recommending that owners put in root barriers, which are like a plastic barrier that you insert when you parallel to the sidewalk and the curb when you plant, and that will help force the tree roots to grow down rather than out alongside the sidewalk. It was a very well-attended meeting with the Caulfield Neighborhood Association. We got a lot of great questions. It was about 30 or 40 people. We'll be doing a second meeting with the Tower Vista neighborhood tomorrow night at 7 o'clock at the Ainsworth House. And then I believe we're going to go talk to South End Neighborhood Association and to the CIC in the future, but we don't have dates for that just yet.
So I guess just want to add, as we started working through this, what you quickly realize, while we can certainly reduce some of the fees and subsidize that through general fund, which we are doing in this case, and that planning isn't taking a street tree fee. We're doing inspections for free, trying to assist and keep the costs down, because we do realize that some of these costs can be significant for a property owner. We are also going to start looking at, as Pete did talk about, other alternatives, whether that be relocating the sidewalk. If the property owner is willing to work with us to give us an easement across their property, we can relocate. The property owner can relocate the sidewalk. If there are other flexible types of sidewalks that can be put down, if you can grind down the lip, as long as it still maintains the integrity of the sidewalk. So we're going to be much more flexible in considering options. But I think what the larger picture is, where does the responsibility fall? Should it be with the city or with the property owner? And right now, our code says that it is with the property owner. We would not recommend the city taking on this without some type of a funding source, similar to probably the pavement maintenance utility fund fee for sidewalks and street repair. It would be significant. It would be a good way to do it. It would have continued revenues to be able to work our way through the city and replant and repair sidewalks as we go. So without being able to take that step, the next step below that is to try and identify consultants. We can put together a recommendation list of consultants that can be used, contractors that can be used. We're going to work with local garden supply stores, identifying trees that are readily available. We hope to expand our street tree fund. As you may recall, the last time we did our code updates, if someone doesn't want to replant a tree or they can't fit it on the site, they can start paying into a fund, figure out a way to start utilizing those fees as well. At this point, though, with the lack of development that we're seeing, there's very minimal amount of money coming into that fund. So with that, I think it's the first step is the education component. So that's why we're going to visit the neighborhood associations, the CIC. And we did put it in the Trail News as well, and try and address some of these concerns through flexibility in what we allow to be replaced. But in some instances, the integrity of the sidewalk may be so bad that it needs to be replaced. Grinding it down may not be an option. Cutting out a part of the sidewalk. Most of the sidewalks are 5 foot wide. ADA has gone to 3.5 feet for minimum clearance. So you could take off 1.5 feet, creating a little area around that tree, which may help. If just one part of the sidewalk is tilted up, you could cut out the damaged part and keep that. Like many things, each one of these is going to be very site specific. It's going to depend on the type of the tree, the amount of damage done, how big the tree is. So one option or one mitigation measure isn't just going to be citywide, and that's what we can adopt. We're going to have to go look at each one of these, and some of the fixes may be simple, and some of them may be take the tree out and rebuild the sidewalk. That's pretty much going to be the range that we're going to see with this. Another thing that we are doing is we are currently starting our transportation system plan update, which drives our street design, and what we're pushing for is an additional width on the planter strips. Go from right now it's 4.5 feet. We'll try and push that a little bit wider, and then installation and requiring the installation of root barriers will assist with that as well for newer subdivisions and newer plantings. But trying to remedy these situations where we have these 3 foot, 2.5, 3 foot, 3.5 foot planter strips. It's going to take a little bit to work through all those, and we are going to run into instances where some trees do crack that sidewalk, and we'll work with the property owner as best we can to get them through the process. But at this point, we don't have the funds or a revenue source for the city to take that on citywide. We've been working with Public Works quite a bit. This is both planning and Public Works. They're working with the infrastructure. They have their street sweepers out there. And so John Lewis has been working with us quite a bit on this issue, and he's been helping us with the presentations as well. So I don't know if John had anything else to add, or he'd be happy to answer any questions if they do come up concerning Public Works.
I've got one question. It doesn't pertain to exactly what you're talking about, but I notice that tree plantings along streets these days trees tend to be very columnar, very erect. I look at some of the older neighborhoods in the Portland area where they have these broad canopies extending over the streets. To me, they look a lot more attractive, well-established trees. The other thing I notice is when you put these columnar trees underneath utility lines, you just leave this big gap, and they keep on pruning under the gap, and they're not attractive at all.
Yeah.
Whereas actually these more expansive canopies, you can cut out a segment, and yet the growing pattern can reestablish itself and still look nice. I don't know if we have a policy that requires these columnar trees going in, but I don't find them particularly attractive in some areas.
Well, that's where you're going to see the trade-off on the policy. The columnar trees tend to have roots that grow down more than out. You tend to see with those wider canopy trees, the root is pretty much going to go to as wide as the tree is. And that's the trade-off. We can certainly push for wider planter strips, implement these measures, and try and get wider canopy trees. But why you see those type of trees is trying to stay within a 4.5-foot planter strip and not crack the sidewalk.
Plus, we've got, our current list has a list for under power lines, and then PGE has a list for a fairly small list for what is appropriate.
Small trees.
But I think what we've been doing until we update our street tree list to be more up to date and recognize some of these hybrids that are available. We've been relying on other municipalities' adopted lists because they have similar planting strips and that sort of thing, Portland in particular. That's been a good workable policy.
Just out of curiosity, our current street tree list, does it prohibit fruit trees? What is if I wanted to plant an apple tree outside of my house and step outside and get an apple for breakfast in the future, would I be prohibited from planting that apple tree?
In the planter strip, yes.
I would. Strip, yeah.
There are very few fruit-bearing trees on the list, but
It's a maintenance issue.
Yeah.
And
So the apples fall and then you slide on.
It's a lie.
Kathy?
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. When is the quarter-inch change due for ADA? When does that go into effect? You don't know?
I don't know.
Okay. And then what will be the city's responsibility for this new standard? Is there a timeline to adopt it, or?
John, do you know that?
You mean for the ADA standards?
It's a federal requirement.
My recollection, we just saw some training videos on this. 2014 is the target time. There is some question, though, about how stringent the adopting agency is going to be with regard to agencies having to adopt those policies themselves. There's some recommendations, but whether or not they're going to be required to implement is another story, because there's costs associated with a lot of those. For instance, we're seeing now with our pavement projects a question about whether or not we're supposed to actually revise the ADA ramps at all those, when really what we're doing is a maintenance project, a pavement maintenance project. So, for instance, your street utility fee was established based on a pavement maintenance liability, not a pavement maintenance liability and the ADA ramp liability that goes along with it.
Yeah.
So, I guess to answer your question, it wasn't clear to me when we were actually going to have to implement that quarter-inch standard for.
The other part of it is, in this neighborhood, there's huge variance in what's going on, and in fact, we don't walk on the sidewalks at night. We walk in the middle of the street, and it's just safer. So, I don't understand that big variance in,
It's years of development, different ranges of trees, types that have gone in. You talk about the lower ones, and they're trouble for us too, because we can't get close enough to the curb with our street sweeping machine, or the garbage trucks can't get close enough to the curb. So it's another reason for trying to move these trees away from that curb line. That's a good thing for both the sidewalk and for the street maintenance that we might typically want to do. But you're right, there's a large variance. The city did a sidewalk in sidewalk replacement project, I think I'm going to venture it was 2004 or 2005, where the city went mostly through the McLaughlin neighborhood. I think that was the neighborhood where they had applied for some grant funding and the city got it, and we went through and did a fair amount of replacement of sidewalk pieces. But you're right, this neighborhood I've walked through many times as well. It's a hodgepodge of sidewalk widths, sidewalk scoring, sidewalk condition, planter strip conditions. We don't have the slide for the McLaughlin neighborhood, but there was a fair amount of problems in the McLaughlin neighborhood.
What I'm basically talking about is you'll see one house that's gone through and kind of repaired things, and then the next house on either side is just, way up and down. So it doesn't seem to be consistent.
And I think that the consistency that you see in neighborhoods like this is because they were developed over probably a 5 to 10 year period, whereas not so much in this neighborhood.
Okay.
So everything looks fairly similar in the Caulfield neighborhood as opposed to the McLaughlin neighborhood. So
Well, if you're out walking at night, I'd suggest the middle of the road.
you both. I do that in my neighborhood too, and it's fairly new. But you trying to get neighbors to trim up their trees. It would. I think it would consume your code enforcement group if they tracked down all the tree related concerns.
Okay, thank you.
And this is another one of the code criteria that is addressed reactively rather than proactively. These are code complaint driven. We are not out there proactively identifying and citing property owners.
So does it bother you, this new program we have where we can do it on our phones?
I think it'll
How many
show
sidewalk
where
pictures
resources
have you
need
taken?
to be spent.
It'll
just
show
so
where
you know.
Yeah.
I think this inventory shows it. Your question about now that the city knows about it, does that add some liability? It's an interesting one because we had never done an inventory, but based on some feedback that we heard through the commission meetings, we use seasonals. I don't know if you heard about this inventory, but we used seasonals to do it. They did it on bicycles or walking, so it was a pretty low cost way to go out and get a quick inventory of street trees. So now we do know something about where there's some liability and where there's some pavement concerns. But is that a liability that the city takes on? I guess that's an interesting question. I had not thought about it that way. But the other thing I would say about our meeting, I was amazed at how receptive people were to wanting to keep trees. They all felt like trees were very important, and depending on the neighborhood and how it's presented, some neighborhoods haven't been so receptive to that. They've been pretty frustrated with the city's tree policies. But this neighborhood, who hadn't seen any information on it or hadn't really rallied around the idea, they seemed pretty excited about keeping trees, and they were very important to them. So I thought that was good.
Thank you.
And David, you're the last one on.
Well, yeah, there's some things here that to me are pretty alarming. I think what Tony and his staff have pointed out tonight is that it feels like we're in this transition point where we're going to really go the extra mile to try to work with property owners in these places where we have these narrow planter strips, and there is, unlike a lot of the things we take on, there is a sort of an end in sight on that. What there isn't an end in sight on for me is that the 27% canopy, to me, is just not nearly enough. I mean, one of the challenges with all these different sidewalks, I don't think anybody's hit on this, but that's part of the, we're always talking about how being the oldest city west of the Rockies is an asset and a liability at the same time. And this is one of the reasons we have these old sidewalks. And when I hear a commissioner saying I can't walk on the sidewalk, I mean, it's just screaming out to me what there's not very many times when you'll hear me say that government should do things that we're not really set up to do. This is one of those situations, though, much like any other kind of public infrastructure, where government is probably the best one to do it because we can do it most consistently. We can provide, I mean, if you think about being a property owner and having one of those sidewalks like that, I don't know when you open the Yellow Pages if it says sidewalk grinder service. I'm kind of doubting that, and that's why Tony is working on trying to find, is there a provider out there? I mean, even if people want to comply, how do they do it?
There is.
It's-
Concrete cutting services do that.
But it's not I think, a thing that's easily available, and when they do, they get their prices vary widely. Whereas if we had a project like this on a larger scale or a continued service, we could sort of do this consistently on a larger scale. But I also believe that they're very much right in that we don't have funding source. The last thing we want to do is take on something like that if we're only going to be able to do it, half. You fill in that blank there, half. I don't want to do it that way, and I don't think you do either. But one of the things I'm going to be talking to our staff about is whether or not we might want to consider amending the PMUF to include, at least in certain parts of the city, the older parts of the city, sidewalks and street trees, and we'll look at that because we don't want to take it on if we're not sure we can do it and do it right. But there's lots of room for improvement when you think about the percentage of canopy and I think a pretty alarming number of panels that just aren't compliant. And I'd like to, we need the power to fix that. We'd like to fix it. I'd like to see us do that. It might be something we bring to you in a retreat setting in the next 6 months. So thank you very much for your work on it.
Thank you.
Tom,
Very
you
good.
want to say something? Come on up.
Yes, Tom O'Brien. The primary reason that I came this evening was over this issue. Within the last 5 years, I would say, the largest turnout that we have had at the Hazel Grove Westling Farms and South End Neighborhood Association meetings has been the evening when Betty Mum, along with Rudy, showed up. We had an extremely large crowd. We had an extremely vocal crowd because in those neighborhoods, the city had already implemented a requirement on the part of the developers to put in planter strips, but did not give them any guidance, evidently, according to what Pete says, as to what to put in those planter strips that was appropriate to our needs. When we talk about liability, I think there is some shared liability there. I know that there are some extreme costly liability issues for the homeowner, and one that was not mentioned, or at least I didn't hear it in the report, has already cost me and a number of my neighbors replacement of irrigation watering systems, where the tree roots came underneath the sidewalk, lifted the sidewalk, and went for the closest source of water. Even though I don't water in the planter strip, those tree roots did not go under the street looking for water. They went to the nearest sprinkler heads. And I had to replace portions of the irrigation system, which was not inexpensive to do. So I think there's a lot of shared liability. I do want to thank the city for getting on this and addressing it in a timely manner. I think that was an important thing to do. But I think you also need to get around now as quickly as possible to each of the neighborhood associations and give them some idea as to where you're proceeding. A couple other thoughts that came to mind as Pete was giving his presentation, and I thank him for it. He did a great job. I didn't catch, what was the measurement, Pete, that was used by the surveyors as far as lift?
I believe they were using a half inch.
They were using half in their indicators? Okay. If we're going to see a quarter inch, I wonder how much those numbers are going to jump. Okay?
Big.
And I would say that if there are surveys yet to be done, maybe we ought to be surveying on the basis of quarter inch at this time, because I know the growth in our neighborhood on the number of the cracks or lifts, it hasn't taken but a year or year and a half for them to go from a quarter inch to almost an inch. As the tree root gets bigger, it gets bigger rapidly.
Sure.
And so you're getting a lot of good lift quickly. With regard to finding the right sources for advice on what trees would be most appropriate, we're fortunate to have right over in Wilsonville the headquarters of the Oregon Nursery Association. If there's anybody who knows what's new in the nursery industry, it is those folks.
Yeah.
Why aren't we talking to them? Why aren't we finding out from them through their, scientific approach to new trees? what has been developed for use in these planter strip applications. So that's one thought. In my particular neighborhood, we have those trees that Doug just loves. They're upright, columnar type trees. They happen to be pear trees, but they're really playing havoc, to be honest with you. I understand they're supposed to go down, but you saw Rudy. Mm-hmm. Did Rudy go down?
Uh-uh.
No, Rudy went, as are most of them in our neighborhood. The city also works very closely with backflow contractors, people who come out and check our backflow devices. I think they could follow that pattern with contractors, whether it be grinders, whether it be replacements, sidewalk replacement people, whatever. Put together a list of people who you work closely with and recognize their ability to perform. Because I think it's important as a homeowner. I don't know who does a good job with concrete. And it used to be I did all my own concrete work, but I'm totally incapable anymore. So I think we need to develop who are the qualified arborists or who can remove a tree efficiently at a reasonable cost, and just have some lists for people available to pursue. What else do I have here?
Can I make a comment on while you're looking? Please. In those lists, I would like to see maybe an agreement that we would have maybe with some vendors to provide trees at a reduced cost. You know, if we send people to this place, we could.
Well, here again, maybe the Nurserymen's Association would have, I think of Garden World down in Woodburn area. Yeah. They buy up surplus inventory from nurseries around at the end of the season, that sort of thing. Obviously, the Nurserymen's Association within their organization could put out a call to a number of nurseries and say, if you got some excess stock you want to get rid of at your cost, help us out. If we're going to end up replacing it, then at least take our cost and drive it down, because people who don't have a good income, I'm particularly concerned about retired folks, we've got people in our neighborhood who can simply not afford to do this. Mm-hmm. And it is a real hardship on them, whether to buy their medications or put food on their table or follow the city ordinances and repair their sidewalks. The other thing that has concerned me, and I've brought it before this body before, is that it seems like street trees are very important unless they're on Agnes Avenue, and we want to remove 100 of them. We'll close with that.
I do have a question, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
When you were at Caulfield, is that your first presentation that you did?
It was. Yes.
Okay, what was the
For
reaction?
street trees,
Okay, did the residents know that they were responsible for the sidewalk? The majority of them?
Well, we didn't really take a poll, so I'm not sure I can answer that. But
Okay.
When we put that slide up that stated that, there wasn't a visceral reaction.
Okay. I just wondered if homeowners actually knew that they were responsible.
That call, Commissioner Mum, wasn't that?
It's stated in our code, but unless you know where to look.
Yeah.
It says,
Yeah.
we've got Chapter 1204 says that the sidewalks, their liability and responsibility, and then Chapter 1208 says the street trees are there.
Yeah.
And we state that in our tree removal guide.
I just didn't know if there was any comments.
Pro and con.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wondered.
And I suspect there are a number of people who just don't know.
That's
Because-
what I'm thinking
Sure.
too.
I think putting it in here was a wonderful move. This makes sense.
And what's surprising is we've received no calls on it,
I know.
which,
It's because it's not their
But you
problem.
didn't
it's-
get any calls on the dip tubes deteriorating. You don't receive
Right.
calls on this. It's
information.
informational. They put it up here. And
Yeah.
And we
down the road, when they trip over that sidewalk in front of their home,
don't know who to
they
call.
remember.
Yeah.
The neighborhoods that have, the Caulfield neighborhood, like I said, is fairly new. So they're yet to kind of experience the wrath of Rudy.
Right.
Of Rudy. I remember that meeting too.
Ours were built like in the 90s.
Yeah, John, you were at that meeting too, weren't you?
I was at that
At
Yeah.
that point where you required planter strips,
Yeah.
But you didn't know what you were doing?
It's a learning process.
You bought the house, so did you?
Well, but, and I think I appreciate Tom's comments, and I think as part of the larger picture of this as well as with the reinstitution of the Natural Resource Committee, this is going to be part of their work plan, is working
Right.
with nurseries, identifying and updating the nuisance plant and tree list, the street tree lists, seeing if we can coordinate with nurseries, because, there are instances where folks just go buy the cheapest tree, which may not be appropriate, and it
Right.
exacerbates the problem because you're going to end up cracking your sidewalk again. So, we see this as an ongoing evolution of addressing this, and we hope to the Natural Resource Committee, with the expertise that they can bring in terms of tree species, planting methods, that we can start moving this forward. And another difficult thing we've heard and we've seen in some of these instances where these roots are getting, instead of going down, they're getting pushed out or up, goes to some of what was put into the planter strip during the construction process. Some of them, and the soil, right.
I was going to mention about somewhere between 12 and 14 years ago, I think, the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association worked for Friends of Trees, and whoever wanted a tree, they had the recommended list of trees to use. So they worked with nurseries and so forth. Residents, and they had a funding source. Residents would pay, I think, $10 a tree, and they cover the difference. And as my recollection is that PGE came in and bore holes for those trees to be planted in. And so maybe some of these neighborhood associations could approach Friends of Trees to get at least some recommendations along that line if they wanted to approach it. Several scores of trees are planted, actually, in the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association.
And I think that
as you move forward on the selection of the species, I think John's input is extremely important because he has some major problems with certain types of leaves gathering in
Tom, you have to come up.
Maybe the smaller leaves
Tom,
wash
you have
through
to come up
quicker,
to the
or maybe
mic.
that's not what you want. But I think John has to give some guidance.
Tom, you got to come to the mic.
I think we got it. We got it.
I think John needs to add his views to the picture relative to leaf configuration and how it affects catch basins and water flow through those catch basins.
Yeah, we prefer the kind with no leaves.
That was Public Works and Fire Departments.
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely kind of a work in progress, and if you have suggestions on what kind of information to put into that presentation, we'd be more than receptive.
I think you did great.
Rocky's got an idea.
Mayor, I want to also, I'd like to add that while we were talking about this tonight, it sounds like there was kind of a negative connotation about them, the street trees, because we were mostly focused on that problem. But I also want you to have some faith that your staff is working diligently to improve our tree canopy apart from this planter strip problem. Because even when we look outside our planter strips, we know that we have a number of places in the community where large deciduous trees can be planted that do provide an incredible broad canopy and live hundreds of years. And those are places where our staff is proactively looking for places to plant those trees, and we budgeted funds for that. And I think you remember my informing the commission on that a few months back. One of the most recent examples of that is a bur oak tree that Scott had to custom order, because this wasn't available locally, but he ordered a bur oak tree that's planted at the library, and I think some of you showed up for the planting ceremony that day. And that tree's doing great, looks fantastic, and
Good.
should be there longer than us. So,
Do you have something to say, Rocky, or not?
No,
Anyway,
I just thought it would be a plastic
we're going to take a 10-minute break just to irritate those people that came in for the last time. Go ahead and, are we ready, Nancy?
Ready?
The last item on our agenda, future use of the end of the Oregon Trail site and planning for a trail event in 2013. Scott Archer.
Thank you, Mayor Neely and Commissioners. Just a quick background on this. As I know that you all know, we last year the end of the Oregon Trail vision study was completed along with the help of the task force and a consultant. and that was presented to the commission. Then we had another kind of a revisitation or a little, I guess, a discussion on this at an April work session. The commission did discuss this in your goal setting at the beginning of the year, and it was determined that the dealing with what to do with the end of the Oregon Trail site was going to be deferred for this year because of other priorities, and would be put deferred until at least next year. Though the facilities are closed, the visitor information center, of course, remains open and is being continually operated by the county with a contract with the Clackamas Heritage Partners, and that, from all the reports that we receive, continues to go very well.
It's an awesome site,
Yeah.
even though the other buildings aren't open.
Correct. The other thing I want to mention before I get into the specific requests that we've got in front of us are that, and I just think it's important for the commission we just want to keep this on your radar. The city, though the wagon train buildings, the main interpretive buildings are closed, the city still is doing maintenance at this site. We do all of the ground maintenance, and it's a pretty good sized site, so that's fairly sizable. We clean the restrooms, the outdoor, the kind of the park restrooms that are there at the front of the entrance, and then we continue to provide building maintenance and pay some utility costs to keep it sort of in its mothballed state, and we do provide some support building services at the visitor center for larger types of things that contractually it's still our building, though county operates it. We've discussed that relationship, I think, a few times, so you're probably familiar with that. So that's just kind of, I guess, just the quick reminder or background of where we're at. There have, of course, been no decisions made on what the specifics are going to be of the future use of that site at this point. However, we have a couple of things in front of us that we need some direction from you on where you'd like us to go. The first is that, and I think most of you are aware of this, the Oregon California Trails Association is planning to hold its annual convention in Oregon City in the summer of 2013, so a year after next summer. It has. There's been some suggestions that it would be nice if the mayor and city commission would extend a formal invitation of some type. I don't think anything like that has occurred to my knowledge, but that that organization or that entity, of course, the matchup there would be, it'd be nice for them to be able to use the end of the trail site specifically. There are, if this were going to occur, there are some significant, coordination and site issues that would need to be addressed, and we're talking about this a little less than 2 years away, but we've got some lead time here to decide what to do. So we've got that item, and then the other is that in your commission report that I provided you, there's an attachment, a letter dated June 28th of this year from Historic Oregon City, and that is requesting the use of some of the enclosed interpretive buildings for some programming type purposes, and I believe that I've talked to you in another work session previously about that there are some these special requests are coming up, whether it's from Historic Oregon City, who are the same organization that are on site already. So some just natural things come up that would be nice to be able to use some of the facilities. We've had a request from community groups to use the building. The parking lot, we have a lot of requests to use that for either for larger parking events or even things like the Boy Scouts annual Christmas tree sale or just different things like that. And I've had to kind of just use my judgment on each of those requests and sort of work through those with no firm direction on what we're really supposed to be doing or not doing. We've we sort of treated those special requests as just as we would like a park reservation or rental or something. So we've been kind of managing those, but we've been managing those without really knowing for sure what the desire of the commission is to do that. So, so we're looking for some direction, some guidance from the commission as to what you'd like to do. Gail and Dan from CHP Historic Oregon City are here to talk potentially to you specifically about the request in the letter, if you'd so wish to ask them any questions. But we'd like to I guess what the request here is to have some conversation tonight about where do you want to go with these two specific items, and then kind of in general, are there any other thoughts or direction about where we want to go in terms of just the overall planning process for the future of this site?
As far as the overall planning for the site, Phil Yates made a very specific suggestion at the last Urban Renewal Commission meeting about using the site as a like a covered farmers market. And I could see how that there's been a lot of discussions from a number of people in town regarding Oregon City's really good geographic location, kind of on the interface between the metropolitan Portland area and a lot of the agricultural areas, and how we could develop a pretty good local economy based on value-added food processing from a lot of the smaller and independent farms in out 213 and even in the Willamette Valley. And that area could be kind of a focal point for that developing economy. And having a kind of a really more complex farmers market system focused on that site is something I'd like to explore. I think it'd be a good complement to the historic resources that we have there, and I think there's a lot of merit in exploring that idea.
We got people here who probably want to address that, and I think I'm going to invite anybody who wants to speak to that to come up. I've heard of a lot of different ideas coming out. Is there anybody here that wants to speak to that issue? If not,
Yes.
about how to use the site. I mean, he's brought up one example that came out. I mean, we have more general dialogue about how that site is going to be used. Come on up.
City, Gail Yaslino, Historic Oregon City. And I think all those ideas are great. What I was proposing, since we've been closed, but visitor services has kind of stayed, and then we've gradually built up and having some groups come in to that space. And tomorrow I have a group coming from Spokane. We have people coming from Denmark and Germany, all over, and they come specifically to see the end of the Oregon Trail, a lot of them. And so my proposal was, until the city comes up with a better use or a different use, or maybe some of these ideas could be incorporated, I've offered to kind of handle some of those coordinating events, and of course with the site support committee and other committees in town, the heritage coordinating committee, maybe with some of that collaboration, do events, or the farmers market. There's lots of ideas. We have people coming in all the time with ideas too. So, but what I would like to propose is, when I have an opportunity to meet the needs of a tourist or visitor, that I would have permission, or even, a request by email to Scott or whoever, to go into the buildings, and, I could promote senior citizen activities. I mean, there's all kinds of connections that, we could facilitate. So I just, it could be temporary or whatever, but just to take care of the people that are coming, that's the concern.
I think that's great. Scott, did you have any concerns or questions about that liability or any?
I mean, that's what I was. My comments were that if we whatever we do, be it for the trails event upcoming or any changes to what we're doing right now, we have. There are some issues that have to be addressed. The liability potentially could be one of them, and I suppose that would have to be, I think, spelled out in some type of an agreement or what have you if we're going to expand our what we're doing on the site. Also, I think what we have to keep in front of us is the report was pretty clear about the condition of the buildings that. We know that we've got some buildings that are in a deteriorated condition that we need to address. For example, the most immediate concern is on the, and I'm talking about the wagon buildings. Those need to, we need some pretty significant roofing maintenance to be done, probably to the tune of about $30,000. We're trying to kind of hold that off until some, decisions are made about the broader use of the site. Are those buildings going to remain there, or what have you? We don't want to make a major investment in a maintenance item if depending on if something's going to change or if it's going to stay. We just don't know. So we've got some of those types of concerns that will have to be still kind of worked through. As I said, periodically there have been a few occasions where Gail's contacted my department and just said, we've got this group of 50 people that are visiting from out of town, and they just literally need a sort of a resting staging area, so we've let them in the theater for a little while, especially on a hot summer day, just to kind of stay cool, but on a very restrictive, limited type of thing. And the more that we keep opening that up, the more that we've got to kind of address these building issues. And I think what they're suggesting to do probably has some good merit, and as from a visitation and promotion standpoint, I think it's nice that we could utilize the site. But I do have to also give you sort of the practical side, because we're still responsible for taking care of things. So, yeah, we have to kind of move forward in a little bit with a little bit of understanding of those issues.
Because
and I don't have all the answers for you right now on that.
Right.
I have a comment with liability. We still are fully insured.
Okay.
So we've been carrying the insurance.
That's great.
Because there are people on the grounds and...
I think the more it's open, I think that's the better way to go. And if it's a temporary thing and you guys are willing to do it, I mean, until this body can decide what they want to do with the whole thing. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Rocky?
I'm on there, right? Okay. I have a couple thoughts on this. I think that we have to be careful with it, and I don't see that we can make obviously any decision about opening the building in any major way or any significant way within the next year, just because of the commitment we've made on our goals and the priorities we've made. But I also don't think the building should be sitting there completely empty every day, especially in instances when we may have a particular group on a particular day that is a large-sized group that can't be accommodated within the visitor center itself, that there has to be some sort of process for CHP, or really any organization, to come through the city in a formal process to use the building. And I think that it needs to be done in a way that's probably consistent with the way that we rent out picnic shelters and like Buena Vista building, I think there needs to be a process that's consistent with what we're doing at other park sites in terms of building use. And, that way there's a record of a particular event that's happening on a particular day. It's not it's not a consistent schedule that implies that we're opening the building in any way, but it's a specific use that we can create a calendar on. We can determine, is this a use that's going to require custodial service or extra utilities for the day or whatever, and kind of build that into it. And if that means that it's an event that possibly the city benefits from, there's probably some groups that might want to use the building on a particular day for an event that we say, well, it's going to cost you $100 to do that. There might be another situation where it's a group that's contacted the visitor center, and it definitely is worth us trying to make accommodations for a particular group that's visiting the city. And maybe, at the staff level, those fees are waived for that particular day. But I think it really does, even in the sense that CHP uses the building, I think it needs to be a formal, even if it is an email kind of way, to create a schedule where they're using the building, and we can kind of track that and just kind of keep so we're not just opening the building. And I think that needs then the events specifically like the 2013 event would basically be dealt with in very much the same way. So I think we have to, if we allow the opportunity for CHP to access the buildings for particular groups that are coming into town, I think we have to do it for any group that possibly wants to use it. But I don't think we can do that unless we have a pretty great process to do that. And I don't think it would be too hard to adapt, what we have already in place. And I don't know, you can speak to that in terms of what we set up. I guess the Buena Vista building is one of the better examples I can think of in the city where, there is a process to fill out an application to use the building for the day. And so I guess that's kind of my feeling on how to approach it. And then, next year we go through the goals process and decide if, we're going to go to any greater level with that. But I don't think it's fair for us we don't know what we're doing in terms of that building on a grand scale. But I don't think we should be turning, groups of 50 or 100 people that want to come visit Oregon City away. Because these people are going to come into Oregon City for the day, and they're going to go eat in Oregon City or spend the day. So I think we really do need to, look at that trade-off and say, is this group worth the day it's going to cost $100 to open the building, or who knows what the price is? But I think we need to know that cost. And I think then the staff has to somehow make a determination. Is it worth, waiving that, or do we need to charge a group on that day for this, especially if, they're charging the group to come in. But I think that's all stuff that should be dealt with on a staff level, I think.
Right.
Just to your point about the reservation system, Commissioner, we do have through our parks office, we have the system in place for reservations for the park picnic shelters, the Buena Vista House.
Right.
And so we do that on a regular basis anyway. So I think we could accommodate this into that system somehow if that's the way we want to go. I think where it gets a little bit to be a little bit of a concern for staff is just depending how it's been pretty limited and by the way, and your point about communication, documented uses and so forth. Gail's been great about writing us an email way in advance saying, hey, could we accommodate this group? And she's worked with my staff and I, and so they've been great about that, and there hasn't been even the slightest bit of any concern or problem about that. It's just if we open it up to the broader community and how much requested use we get into, then that's added staff time, and we're already pretty busy and have a lot of things on our plate. I have no way of knowing, how much additional workload that may mean, but if it's a few things a year, a few special things here and there, I don't think that's any big issue. But then if it starts to really
grow,
snowball, then it gets to be a concern. And then also with the CHP group, what's nice is they're on site, and they can actually be kind of coordinate that stuff, and we just work out the arrangements with them. But if it's another group and we have to let them in, then we really don't. We don't have event staff. We don't have on-site staff. So then it kind of gets to the point of, well, how do we do that unless we create some additional staff people or something like that. So that's the part that gets a little tricky for me. I'm comfortable with the sort of on a limited basis working mostly with CHP being on site, and then for some bigger special events well in advance, like the trail event, we could probably work through those issues. But on more of just a kind of a regular basis, there's a little bit of concern about not really having the staffing in place to do any of that. So,
just a couple comments, Mr. Mayor and members of the commission. Thank you for even talking about this again, because it is an important asset for the community.
Absolutely.
And I think one thing we should all keep in mind is this is the recognized national significant end of the Oregon Trail. So it should always be, I think, first and foremost, the use should be surrounding that effort. And the other thing I've learned is until we know where we're going to go, we're never going to get there.
You're right.
And I think the way to get things to happen is to make decisions. Now, we don't want to make decisions foolishly, so that's the struggle we're in. But I think when I think of the area down there, I think we can do a couple of things to be prepared for. If we put down a marker that's the summer of 2013, because this is a very important group that's requesting of us to use a facility in our town. If that's a marker out there, I think that gives us all an impetus or a goal to shoot for, to say, well, what can at least happen by then? One, we need better signage and a better interpretation on the exterior of the facility so that 24/7 anybody could go on those grounds free and have an experience of learning more about the end of the Oregon Trail. And a lot of that's in place, but it can be improved. It can be a little better signage can happen. When I think about the interior, I love the idea of getting it used. I mean, we've had a 25% increase in visitor counts this year. People from, I don't know how many foreign countries, a lot. And not everyone that comes to the visitor center would pay something to go into the inside. But a lot of them would. Probably 80 to 90% of them would. Now, there's a lot of details to that. How much for children, how much for kids, what's the experience, is it worth the value? All those questions need to be answered. My point being, the model that we've tried to operate under since we've really changed our mode of operation was to be self-sustaining. We have a wonderful staff. We have all the interpreters really in place down there, or a lot of them. And the idea, whether it be a group or any potential period down the road, that it ever be opened for the public to go in on a limited basis, it would be self-sustaining. So it wouldn't burden the city any more than you're doing now, which is huge, to have the efforts of utility and lawn mowing and landscape maintenance. It is huge to a struggling nonprofit to have just that. So the question I have, and I think your idea is good to say, how can people use it? But it's also full of about $400,000 worth of artifacts that are owned by Clackamas Church Partners. So there's a little struggle in there within me, not want it exposed and used by the public, but I kind of cringe a little bit and go, we got to make sure it's protected, and that the well-meaning Lions Club that wants to come down there for dinner one night has the appropriate caution to tell that. So there's that little. That's a little bit.
I think the buildings need to be looked at individually.
You bet.
I mean, the front store building is one that,
absolutely.
So I think that needs to be really dealt with. I'm not talking about the building all as a whole. I think each building has its own
I agree with that. And I think there's maybe a way that with some work with Gail and Scott, and if it's allowed, that we could take some of that burden of scheduling that was maybe a little more in detail than what you're doing at the park shelter. When it comes to inside the building, maybe we can try to manage that with good communication with Scott and the staff. So, but I think there are things that we can do short of full-blown opening that allows the public greater use inside, a better experience outside, and that we're improving the facilities between now and 2013. So those are just general comments, but I think, and I do like the idea of a farmer's market. I think that can augment it. More people are exposed to the area. There's details in that: when, where, how much. Is it permanent? Is it set up every Saturday? There's a lot of little details, but parking's there. There's a lot of things that could be really positive about those types of uses. So,
I guess David, he's on the list here, so I'm gonna let him go ahead. Rocky, are you back on?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna squeeze in before you do.
That's fine.
I'll defer to the end there, if it's okay.
Okay. I guess, and we've got our internal granting agencies that we allow money. It still frustrates me quite a bit that a person driving into Oregon City can't find good directional signs to get from the Interpretive Center to the McLaughlin House to the Museum of Oregon Territory. I think that's something that can be done in a year. You get to Abernathy Green, where'd you go next? And we don't have that, and that's something we should have had for a long time, and we don't.
We have one right by Spicer Brothers.
Yeah, there's some,
Yeah,
but not from the freeway. Once you're in town driving around, you can probably figure
Maybe
it out.
right
But
across the street when you leave there.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
more obvious.
Yes,
Right.
make it,
Yes.
hit them right in the face so that they can see where they're going. And to get them around the other parts. I mean, by the time this one event happens, we're going to have a two-way street on Main Street for one thing.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
We had
and,
a couple come
so-
in today lost, and what saved them is they saw the Oregon Welcome Center.
Yeah.
And that's what they saw first. And so they came in, help.
Yeah.
We did.
Anyway, Rocky?
But I think just for staff, it's important just for us to as a commission, acknowledge that we think that the building, should be used in the event that we feel that it's necessary for a particular group. But I think I'm comfortable having Scott make that decision. I mean, what level do they feel that it should be opened? I mean, I don't care how the process works, but I think whatever the process is. But I think just a nod from us that if there's a group available that's coming into Oregon City that warrants opening the building, whether it's connected with the visitor center or not, I think that's a determination that you need to make. And
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. That's a lot of my angst is not wanting, not that we don't
not
want
wanting
to
to
be
be the
supportive,
one to.
but we just don't know if we're acting completely
I
on an
think-
island on our own, or if this is supported by the commission,
Right.
and you're
Yeah.
okay with this.
Right.
So that gives that if you're acknowledge that you're at least comfortable with that, kind of as a sort of the base
Yes.
point of this discussion, then we can at least know that. So that does help
My
us.
peripheral vision is seeing hands. Did I see your hand go up, Jim? not good peripheral. I saw Tom, and then I saw
I think it was
Margaret.
stretching. I'll get out of the way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Yes.
David had something to do.
He said he's going to wait till
Yeah,
the end.
David's got some.
He said he was going to wait till the end.
After Rocky, I think.
Well, go right ahead while
Is it the end?
we're coming
I'm
up.
done.
Oh, it's not the end. Okay.
Marge
I'll wait till
Harding,
then.
Oregon
Okay.
City, and I'm sitting here and I keep thinking, I can't talk, and you notice where I am sitting right now. Sorry. One of my passions for Oregon City is Oregon City. And one of the things that we're not doing is talking about and telling the story of Oregon City. And fitting that into all of the things that have been talked about, for me, is an incredible necessity. Tell the story of historic Oregon City. David Frazier said to us a year ago when he came here that Oregon City, the end of the Oregon Trail, then what? And he said the words to us, my husband, Rolla, and myself. He said, Oregon City, the gateway, and he went like this, and the words popped into my head, the future. And so that's always been kind of mine, is that Oregon City was the gateway. But we're not telling the story of Oregon City. And there is so much to tell. Our kids aren't learning it. What's the big deal about Oregon City? Well, if maybe we talked about it and we told the story, we could develop that passion in others. And there's no reason why we can't do something in that store area that's in the building or with people or something. But tell the story of Oregon City.
Thank you.
Tom.
Tom O'Brien, Oregon City. I perhaps come with a little bit different perspective, and any of you who have known me for any period of time know that I have a keen interest in history. But I also have a keen interest in seeing that things that the taxpayers are supporting with their tax dollars are somewhat self-supporting and self-sufficient. I have been on, I would hate to tell you how many tours where I have gone to historic sites that significantly predate Jamestown of 1609, where the bus stopped for an hour, 45, 50 people jumped off the bus, went in, looked at the site, used the restrooms and consumed the paper, etc., jumped back on the bus and went to the next destination. Didn't spend a nickel unless there was a tray or a plate in the restroom that enabled them to drop a coin. I don't think that the taxpayers of Oregon City are all that keenly interested in paying the bills for visitors to visit our historic town. And I would suggest that those groups who wish to come in and spend time at our hotels, purchase meals at our restaurants or catering operations, that we should endeavor to satisfy their needs and requirements. I recently had 5 visitors from Chicago myself. I did not put them up at the Oregon City Motel. I went to Gladstone for obvious reasons. We need to do something if we want to attract tourism, and I have said this for years. Not only do we need adequate signage, and there are some wonderful things being done in the signage worlds today where you can relatively inexpensively, because of technology, build signage that really tells the story. I think the state of Oregon has done a magnificent job of that in many of their sites. We are not doing it here. But it has to be self-supporting. You know, I applaud groups such as we have that are pursuing those avenues. To me, I don't personally get involved because I don't consider 1640s historic in nature. To me, that's pretty recent times.
How old are you, Tom?
I'm a fossil. Okay. And I tend to have more interest in fossils like Pompeii and things like that. You know? So I'm willing to pay to go to Pompeii.
Mom was a Viking? No?
Okay. Those are my points. I just think from a taxpayer's perspective, we have to be cautious how we spend our money because we don't have very much. We cannot even afford to have code enforcement enforce our signage codes.
May I just make one clarifying comment? The Visitor Center is funded by the county tourism department, which is which receives, I think, most of its funding through lodging taxes. So that piece is mostly funded, I think, through lodging taxes. The contract, the county's contract with CHP is mostly lodging tax funded. So just that component. I know there are other aspects to visitors using facilities that Mr. O'Brien might have been speaking of, but I wanted to make sure everybody's aware of that.
One thing that comes up more frequently in previous commissions than this one, but is the use of the trolley. And the fact that we don't have a voluntary collection box on the trolleys has been brought up. I mean, people getting on.
There used to be.
Oh, there are?
Yeah.
Are there?
There used to be on at least one of them.
Do they have a collection boxes on?
If they all have them.
I didn't
I
think
get
so.
I get no shakes, and that is sort of my impression that we don't have them, so that at least somebody that wants to throw in the dime has a place to throw the dime into.
Right.
But anyway, yes.
Maybe we could put Conestoga wishing wells all around town. To echo Marge, I wasn't really planning on speaking, except now I need to respond to Marge. The Museum of the Oregon Territory is open, and it does tell the story of Oregon City. Between the two facilities, we kind of viewed it as the Interpretive Center told you about getting here. The Museum of the Oregon Territory tells you what was here before and what happened after. Through sponsorships, through some donations, the museum's open on Wednesdays and every other Saturday, and we're working really hard on getting it open more days. But one thing I keep hearing from people is just open the doors at the Interpretive Center. And Dan made reference to what they have stored down there. It's not an attraction if you just open the doors to an empty building.
Right.
And working at the Chamber of Commerce, I get frequent phone calls from people. I'm coming to visit Oregon City. What do I do? Well, until the end of October, you can take Rocky's walking tours on weekends. If you're here on Wednesday, you can go to the Museum of the Oregon Territory and McLaughlin House. If you're here Thursday, you can go to Stevens Crawford House and McLaughlin House. We're slowly rebuilding. It's hard to create a package for people to come do things here. And I disagree with Tom. People do come here. They spend at least one day. So there's at least a meal or two. If they come by the Chamber, they go by the Visitor Center. We tell them about shopping opportunities in Oregon City, local restaurants. But it's keep in mind that it's not just open the doors on the wagons. Scott pointed out there's maintenance needs.
Oh, yeah.
And it needs to be in some way, shape, or form an attraction again, even if it's just one wagon.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I thought you were repositioning yourself.
Don't teach me to say I want to go last.
Do you notice that?
No, that's going to teach you not to say that you're going to go.
Sorry, we'll be real
She
short.
knows better by now.
Kathy's on there now, too.
Yeah, now Kathy's on there. I might go
I'm
again.
not sure if, is it Dan Fowler again, but on the email or the agenda, I didn't see the attachment. It said it was there, but I didn't see the attachment of our actual business plan. So I'm not sure you've actually read the business plan that we've put together. But we have a business plan for the inside of the wagons. It involves putting the movie back up, making it more interactive. For $1,500, we can buy interactive terminals for students and school groups so they can vote on different questions that come up. Their teachers can put in the questions into that. We have a complete business plan on how to open that wagon again. This is not about what to do down there. If you just let us go, we can get that inside of it back open. We can make it interactive. We can make an attraction for this town, and we can work together on getting the hoops or covers, if you want to put those back on or not. So there is a plan. If you haven't seen it, let me know. I'll email you a copy of it. But and we're open to having it tweaked and suggested and modified. But it's very interactive. It utilizes the artifacts that are in place already, but makes them more interesting to the general public and to school kids. And it also allows for the first wagon to be also continually used for rotating exhibits, for rotating craft demonstrations, for rotating all kinds of things could happen in the very first wagon. So we have a plan. We're open to suggestions about it. But I don't want to leave here tonight thinking we don't know what to do down there. We have an idea of what to do, and I don't think we're not seeking. We'd love support on funding for some of the ideas there. It's not. I mean, $30,000. If that's what it takes to get our building going and to get tourism and history alive again, and to start moving towards that, we need that kind of an investment in our community. So. I just wanted to make sure that if you haven't seen that, ask. I know Scott has a copy, and we'd be happy to get out there. And we're open to feedback. We really are. We want to do it right for the community. We don't want to do it wrong again. And that doesn't preclude some really good things that we can do on the outside of the facility for events, for farmers markets, those kind of things. So
let me ask a question before we get more testimony. What's the mechanism of getting the various groups like? Well, the Ermitinger House Group, I'll use that as an example. McLaughlin House Group, the Museum. How do you guys get together and talk about a common vision?
We do that now, and it's really working. Do you guys want to elaborate? I just opened up.
We started the site support committee, and what it was is to get all of the 7 sites together so we could find ways to support each other with what we have to offer to open. And what I wanted to say is we have lots and lots of ideas for interactive and experience and the gateway and all of this, but we wanted to work together on some of the ideas. And right now I'm working on some ideas with our website, and we have a meeting Thursday. So some of these things, writing grants together and connecting, because we're stronger together than apart. When the trolley was running, it connects us all. They come to the end of the Oregon Trail, we send them on, then it's Main Street, and I mean, the possibilities are endless when we're working together. So this tonight for me was just, we could start slow and small until everybody's ideas are heard, and I think that's going to take effort on a lot of the organizations.
I don't think there's any one site that's more important than another, but it's all valuable for our city, and we need each other. But if we collectively as a community are going to recognize our history, and that's not the only thing our community should be about, but it's a natural asset we have. Some communities don't have a history. They have other great things, but they don't have the depth of history that we have. It's a natural asset. Now, we have fishing. We can develop water sports. We can develop the agriculture, tourism-based industry. But our natural historic history is an asset that we have. And until we recognize it, I think even more as a community and make it part of an important piece of it, not all of it, but a piece of it. But I think Gail and Rocky have worked hard in bringing that site support committee together. They're talking, they're working, they're prioritizing. That's what the whole Oklahoma show was about. We came together, we promoted it, we sold tickets. It was a very generous offer from the community college theatrical group. Didn't raise a lot of money, but it was the first time working together. But we were going to dedicate all of the money to the Rose Farm.
First go around is great.
We were going to, so they could fix the chimney. But the point was that everybody came together and prioritized an event and an outcome, and that was big for the historical community to do that.
I would agree.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll be quiet now.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
David, do you have something to say?
Oh, I think Kathy's next.
Oh, Kathy, excuse me. No, just wait.
I just had a question for Scott, and that is, you may have said this earlier, do we know what it costs to open that building for 2 hours, 4 hours? Or any of the buildings?
No, we don't have it that broken down into that level of detail. We could do a rough estimate. We just kind of have a sort of a basic utility cost, and then the utilities is kind of an ongoing cost anyway that we've just accepted that we're responsible for those buildings, so we're going to have to do a minimal level. It's not as much about that. It's probably more when we get into if there are any staffing, if there's staff time required of the city,
right,
and any other special accommodations, whatever that might be. I don't know. So we could estimate that. either Dan or Gail mentioned something along the lines of if it's something that they're coordinating, then they can kind of handle a lot of what might have been staff time for us. That works quite well, to be honest with you, and we've had great, just the few little times that we've done that, it's worked just great. They're very, very conscientious about taking appropriate measures about everything in the buildings, and so I don't really know, that depending on what it is, there may or may not be a cost to the city above and beyond the basic utility fees. And if we wanted to break it down like per day or per hour, it'd probably be a few bucks, really, quite honestly. But
Well, the other part of my question is there any, some of those pictures that I saw in the report, are there any types of repairs that need to be done that could be a liability?
That's a really good question. That's something that I need to look at a little bit more. If we were going to start using those buildings a little bit more intensively, then that could be a bit more of a concern. And I'll need to go back. We haven't spent a lot of time delving into this much further at the time because there hasn't been any need to do that. But with this conversation tonight, it gives me the indication that at least we're going to be looking at doing a little bit more there. So I'm going to go back and look at that a little bit more closely. Like I said, I know for sure that the most urgent item is that we need to repair the roof on those buildings, the roofs, plural actually, for not as much just for safety, but water's going to come in if we don't. We think we can get by for one more winter, but it's going to have to be done probably by the next calendar year, if not this year. And other safety and liability issues, that's where I'm a little bit fuzzy. I'll have to go revisit that. So, but yeah, really excellent question about that.
Okay. You want to say something, David?
Bring us home, David.
Well, we're going to appreciate the discretion here that you've endorsed for Scott to continue, because we had a conversation about this a month or two ago, and he said, I feel like I'm out here on thin ice, and I'm not sure it's thin or thick. I'm just out here skating around making these calls and haven't checked in with the commission. And we know from experience that there were some strong feelings here in different directions. And so I think this is good that now we have, and I think it's appropriate for our Parks Department to have the discretion to figure this out. I'm also going to, hopefully Dan and Scott can stick around a little bit after the meeting tonight, because I want to talk to you guys about some of these ideas. But I think we should try to come up with some nominal cost recovery fee that's driven just on our cost. And really, when I think about this site right now, what's complex about it, especially for the beginner who tries to look at it, is that you got three things there really happening. You've got the experience that Dan and his folks are providing, or used to provide, and now are providing part of, which is one thing. Then you've got to the extent you can call it that, an interactive walk-around kind of experience. And then you've got this visitor center, which is, to me, the piece that's right now the best funded. And just from personal experience, when you go in there, those folks are enormously welcoming and warm and helpful.
Yes.
I mean, if you've
done
just
an
gotten out of
job
an unfriendly flight, an airplane or something, and come to Oregon City and walk in there, you're just going to want to pick up and move here. I mean, that's how friendly it is. And I mean, I think that's a wonderful way to say thanks to, thanks for coming. I know my whole family had that experience when we went there the first time they came to visit. So there's those three things, and two of those three are really people and passion dependent. And so I think we want to do everything we can to encourage those people and encourage their passion. At the same time, I kind of feel like we also need to have that self-guided experience. There's not that marker that I know that's down there somewhere. Somebody's going to show it to me one of these days where that marker is. So when people come and they say, where's the spike in the ground that I can go see, or the Pioneer Fountain, or whatever we might construct there someday, there's a self-guided experience. And how many of you watched any of the 9/11 stuff this past weekend?
Yes. Yep.
Jim, I was wondering if you happened to watch the part about all the architecture that's happening down there and some of the amazing things they've done. It's just incredible. Well, it tells a story. I can't remember, I think Marge said it. It tells this incredible story. And if you look at what they've done there, they do have a real high staff component based on planting trees that aren't really in the ground and so forth. But one of the things that's unique about it is not unique. It's unique compared to what our site is there's a big self-guided component that allows a person, regardless of people and passion, to have an experience that really is an emotional one. And the same thing you see at the Vietnam Memorial, the same kind of experience is there. It's not the same memorial, but it's the same feeling. There's a story. This is an incredible pioneer story out here that's just dying to come out of the can and be told to people in a compelling way. And I feel like we need to do that. I'd love to be part of doing something like that and getting ourselves to that next stage. So when Scott comes back, the takeaways we have here is, yes, you have some discretion here to keep what you've been doing, what you've been doing, and then maybe do a little bit more of it. And then I think we have to talk about long-term use and funding for existing facilities. That's a separate thing. And then what's the self-guided part of the story, and how's it going to look and feel? And so when we come back to you at the retreat, hopefully we'll have a topic where we can really talk about that in more detail. If it ends up on your goals and it has funding, we'll get some great architect to come in and give us an idea about how to do this, and we'll tie it to a funding source so we can build the thing in a way that it doesn't necessarily have to be staffed by somebody. And so if we have those extra features that involve people and passion and costs that we can't really afford, that are really dependent on volunteer efforts, they can have that too, but that's the icing on the cake. There's still another piece of it that they can experience if we don't have that. And I think that's what breaks down in so many of our sites. So many of the 7 wonders of Oregon City are that they require some service commitment, and that you guys have struggled so hard to fund all these things. And gosh darn it, the story is just as, it's incredible. I had to be here almost a year before I really, as Rocky said, you got to watch Oregon City because it grows on you and you fall in love with it. And that's kind of happened to me already. But I had to kind of work at it and had to be here every day before I could finally get it. And so I want to find a way for people to get that on their first 30 minutes, and I think we can get there from here. I just want to thank Scott and all the volunteers and all the citizens who care about this, and just been really inspiring to me. So thank you, and that's all I have.
Want to go into the city manager's report? Oh, excuse me, Kathy Roth is on. I am sorry.
I have one more.
You want to get the city manager's report?
You've been promoted, Kathy. You're going to be paid now.
Scott, I have one more concern, and that is with the buildings being closed for so long, if we've had code changes, and like we've experienced with the police department having closed it and then it was not acceptable any longer. So are there code issues that we would need to look at opening it back up?
Again, I'll take a look at that. We're not changing any of the uses, and I think the police building issue had more to do with public safety building component kind of a thing. I'm certainly not the expert to speak on that, but I'll verify that. But I don't think we've changed any of the uses or wouldn't. But we'll definitely double check that.
You don't want to give the city manager's report?
No, I don't.
Okay. David?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a number of things to report tonight. Commissioner Nacita and Mayor Neely's the joint letter for their signatures is ready to go tonight on the Coast Starlight stop proposition for Oregon City, and Nancy has that on letterhead for you. So when you're done, you signed it already. So we'll get copies. Maybe we can email copies out tomorrow. Also, we are working on Mayor, I know that you sent me earlier the press release on the Amtrak closure. I did a little bit. I had to pause a little bit because when you get one of those, it kind of takes your breath away, and then you start thinking about it. And in my discussions with county officials, we think that the chances of this getting through the Senate are slim and zero, but it's still something to be concerned about. So we are
David,
working
why don't you just clarify the distinction?
Yeah.
The Coast Starlight's not affected by this. This is the local routes.
That's right.
The one that actually stops there.
Exactly. the one you actually ride to work.
That's it.
That one, right? Yeah. So we are working on we thought about a resolution. I've seen cities do that. It's fairly common when they see a passionate thing like this or something that's a danger to the community, they'll pass a resolution and send it out. And when I was talking to the county and they had discussed this with one of their lobbyists or their only lobbyist, they said, well, those resolutions they get lost in the whereas paragraphs. Mm-hmm. And so we decided maybe that it'd be more compelling and more effective for us to draft a joint letter with city and county letterhead, and then have a signature line for all 10 elected officials to sign it. So that's what we're working on right now, and we'll try to get that done probably within a week or so, and then we'll start circulating that for your signatures. Let's see here. The county's broadband project, we had a little snag with that today because they were doing some work in city right away, and there was an issue about whether they had the right permits and whether they needed a franchise agreement, and there was a little mix-up, but we're working on that, and I think we'll get it resolved. We also have been continuing our discussions with Metro and the other potential partners almost on a daily basis regarding the Willamette Falls property that you had a presentation on last week. And we're going to be continuing that. It's just, there's a lot of relationship building, and Metro's been taking their show on the road to the other partners, but in between that, there's lots of discussions. Some concerns from the press last time about whether your meeting was qualified for the exceptions, and we've worked through that, and we may have a respectful disagreement with the press on some of that, but we're confident that it is executive session authorized. Also, I want to remind you that I'll be at the ICMA conference. I need to attend that to get my mandatory 40-hour annual training for my credential manager certification. I'll be coming back next Wednesday night on a 7:38 flight, so by the time I get here, I think you'll be done. So I won't be here, but our staff will be well prepared to advise you.
Cancel the meeting, we'll be done.
Yeah, and I believe Scott will be filling in for me.
We'll wait for you. We'll be here.
He'll be here Wednesday, but we haven't worked out the other parts.
Yeah, I'm with Rocky. We'll be here. So
Okay.
we'll be waiting
Just
for you.
come on in whenever you're ready.
And then I have copies of, I only have 3 of these, but I will tell you essentially what this is. The county sheriff is proposing 24 cents a thousand to renew a current, I believe it's a 4-year levy, a Clackamas County Public Safety levy. The levy is used to fund jail beds, sheriff's portion of the Clackamas County Interagency Task Force, which is drug enforcement, about 19 deputies. I believe those are road deputies, so not a very compelling thing for Oregon City, but the important thing for Oregon City is that it does fund these extra jail beds. And I worked in a county before coming here that had 150 bed capacity or more, and like half of them were empty. And our police department would bring prisoners there, sometimes with felony warrants, and they would be out in 5 minutes. You know, picture, sign here, bye-bye. And that does not make a safe community. So I wanted you to have this information. I will pass this out for you. Any of you that want to learn more about it can go to the county's website and see that information there. Let me see.
Did they clear the wording with the Attorney General's office?
That's a county document that was given to me today. I have no authorship in that. Also, you recalled some emails from me about the Oregon Sky Foundation and that business license. We've now retained, through Ed Sullivan, a hearings officer. We have to schedule the hearing for them because we think they're going to appeal it, and they have to have that opportunity before we go to the next step in the process. Before they have that hearing, though, I have to draft a letter denying the application, which I haven't quite done, but we're close to having that. We just couldn't do it till we got this hearing scheduled. So that'll be going out, and you'll get a copy of that letter from me when it's done. I'm not sure. Let me see. I think I might have one more thing. Also, we just received the results of our fiscal year 2010 submission of our CAFR to the Government Finance Officers Association, and we have let's see here, there were, I believe, 18 categories, and we got all but one of them. So we're very, very close to having our CAFR certified, and we're going to compete for that again next year with the hope that with that one box to check that we'll get there. And I really appreciate Dave Wormer. He's back there for all the work he did on that. And I hate to get that close and not get it, but he's still going to be here for one more year. So he has a chance to get that still. Let's see here. And I think that is all I have. Does staff have anything? Any staff? And Maureen and I had our library meeting with county, and we're going to establish a work group to try to work through if there's any mutual usage issues that we can get to. Not sure we can get there, but we might just have to identify what those costs and values are and decide what the trade-off is and to what extent they're going to be willing or able to assist us. So that shouldn't take, we did suggest to them a timeline of about 30 days so that this wouldn't drag on much longer, because it has been a while. And I reminded them that this is on my commission's goals for this year, and this year's coming to, we're moving along here, and I want to make sure that we have something done on the site selection before the year's out. So that's all I have.
Well,
thank you.
We've got no
Thank you.
objections? Yes.
I just wanted to see if I could get an update, David, on the Public Works site selection. We had that great presentation, and it's just kind of like fallen off the radar since then. And I'm just
Yeah. Well, I think what I'll do is, Jim, would you mind just emailing me a request for an update, and then I'll forward it on to Nancy. She's in the Tetons in a canoe somewhere, so hopefully when she gets back, she'll be able to give us an update on that. And then I did neglect to tell you one thing that it sort of came in right as I was walking in the door to the meeting tonight. This is the 3-page, single-spaced response from Urban Renewal Attorney Steve Janik on the various questions we have about the Cove coming up. So we have issues that we need to work through. And in all likelihood, that's going to mean that we're going to be not in a position to recommend something to you other than tabling it or perhaps giving them an extension so we can work on these things. Because you do need to have, I want to be in a position to tell you with some degree of confidence, great degree of confidence, that what you're doing, what your expectations are out there on that site will actually get built, and that the infrastructure can be reimbursed, and that it's all going to pencil. And right now, there's just a lot. They made a lot of big changes in this thing toward the end of this period, which triggers land use concerns, legal concerns, and financial concerns. And I'm not saying we can't work them out, but what I'm saying is this came in, I got this today. And, time has kind of run out, and we're going to need a little bit more time to work through all these things before. And we would need that no matter who or what this project was. These are just some examples of the things we have to work out. It's less than on the rivers, but it's a lot more than I wish it was. So,
Will you get that to us tomorrow?
yeah. Yes, this will be getting out to you before Friday.
With that, no objections? We're done.